Hi, everybody. Welcome back to FinTech and Friends. I'm here today for a conversation that I have been looking forward to for months, maybe even a year. I'm not sure. But Ashley Couto is a longtime friend. She's a colleague, an award-winning writer, reporter, marketer. She has a deep background in tech, and I am so excited to have her on the show today to share so many insights that I'm really hoping will be beneficial for founders, for comms teams. She has a long list of accolades that I'm so excited to share. She's the current head of creators at Passion.io. She's written for National Geographic, Business Insider, Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast, Traveler, Query, just to name a few. And her article on juggling full-time work and running a business was the #1 story of the day at Business Insider, beating out US student loan forgiveness in popularity. So that's really saying something because that is a topic that never seems to be sidelined. Also, her articles on Business Insider have consistently been amongst the site's most read and has even become the hero story on Microsoft Edge. Additionally, it's amazing you have this much time. She is the Inc. columnist on the creator economy and startup culture, and the founder and content creator who has 145,000 followers on LinkedIn. And she talks about all of the above topics. And at the end of the interview, we'll give you ways to connect with Ashley. So, Ashley, welcome finally.
Yeah, it's good to be here for one of our many chats. I think we've known each other for 10, 11 years, something like that at this point. So, yeah, it's good. Finally, people can have an insight into what we normally talk about when the camera's not on.
I love that. I love that. That was so my goal because the last time we had a conversation, I was like, this is so insightful. Like this is like a novella of insight. And I really wanted, your audience and my audience and the founders and, comms people, because I think we both have an interesting mix of people who follow us. And I think that we intersect with a lot of PR people and marketers. And so I thought that, a lot of what we talk about would be very beneficial, especially given the climate today in journalism, especially with a lot of the layoffs that we've seen happening. Pitching has always been difficult. You know this obviously from your time in marketing and PR. What do you think though has really changed, let's say like in the last, 12, 18 months, because it does change fast. And I don't think people really understand how quickly the media landscape changes. So can you speak to some of what you feel has really changed?
Yeah, so I mean, with tighter budgets in media, with all of these layoffs, there is, first of all, just less editors to go around because editors have unfortunately been very highly affected. And the scope of stories that they can cover has often been narrowed. So a lot of the editors that were laid off, for example, at Business Insider, did not really have a hero or successful clicks driving series, at least not from the perspective of being a journalist, where when you would look at the most read stories, when you would look at the top stories of the day, the types of stories, it became very clear that a lot of the editors outside of the news division that they were retaining were people that had a large history with first person storytelling, whether it is someone submitting their own story or a journalist like myself collating and basically curating that story on a source's behalf. Those were really the editors that seemed to, make it out of the water there. So we went from having a lot more content diversity to really going with what were the proven winners. And I would say we've seen that model quite a bit. And in general, we are seeing a lot more first person. So at Inc., for example, I became a columnist because I'm able to share my first person perspective of being a person in tech, being a woman in tech, being a content creator, being in a startup landscape. I've spent the last decade of my life in startups of all shapes, sizes, capacities. And so they're looking for people that can create stories that AI can't, which I think also applies not just at the editor level, but also at the journalist level. We're looking for stuff that people can't have gone into ChatGPT to create or into Claude to create. We need something that is human, that is real, and that is different, and that is going to anchor people into why is it that like Susan living in Topeka, Kansas with her 3 children is going to care enough to click on this story.
I love that. And as somebody in tech also, do you, and I'd love for you to back me up on this essentially, because one of the conversations that I have with my clients all the time is that nobody cares that much about your product. They care about you as the founder. They care about your story. They care about where did you really suffer? What did you overcome? Can you talk a little bit about some of the pitches that you see that maybe just land really flat, that are either product heavy or they just miss the mark in some way?
Yeah, so I see this a lot, especially with AI companies. Everyone's claiming that they're first to market and revolutionary. And if you saw the number of first to market, exact same carbon copy products that are like one after the other in my inbox, because I literally get pitched hundreds of times a day, it's like, well, clearly not, because I'm going down pitches and these are literally the exact same thing with one shade of difference because somebody obviously asked a slightly different question out of Claude at some point. And
Wow.
so we're seeing that a lot where I'm looking at things that look like carbon copies of each other. And yeah, like nobody really cares about your product. People really care about two things. One, what are you actually an expert in, and where can you comment in a story, and where can you have influence in a story? And then the other one is your personal story. Like the market is so saturated. We are starting to talk now about the SaaS apocalypse and needing to find new models and moving to, we're seeing this with Claude, especially in the market right now, but credit-based pricing, having multiple different pricing anchors instead of just one. We're in a moment of a lot of change. So what
Yeah.
expertise, right, can you bring to the market? What do you know about that in the market? And what are you going to bring that's like fresh and different? And your story is one of those things because there's a SaaS for everything. There's an AI product for everything. Now, what is going to make consumers care is why is it that I should support you, right? Like, how do you align with my values, my morals, the types of things that I want to spend money on, the types of things that I care about? Consumers are thinking about that a lot, especially as their dollars are stretching less and less far. Right
Sure.
now, that axis of morality and story and wanting to support people that are similar really is coming into play a lot more than we would have seen, in the end of 2024 into 2025.
I love hearing you say that because I would say that one of my, and I think a lot of comms people can speak to this, like one of my greatest challenges is when you have to kind of pry product and like the company elevator pitch out of the cold dead hands of the founder, where you cannot separate them from their company story. Like you'll say, I need something personal here. And they'll say, okay. And then they will just give another spin on the product pitch. Or you'll say, we have to back away from product because, like you said, you may tell your comms people, you may tell your team, like, this is the first time that anyone has ever done, XYZ, but there's 500 pitches sitting in your inbox that say that they have done the same thing first. And so you're right, like Claude and like ChatGPT, they can't just create your background for you. They can't create what you've been through. But a lot of times I feel like the founders, especially startup founders, they are so nervous. There's so much pressure to sell the store, to sell the product, to sell the product to make the investors happy, or to like, they can't separate necessarily PR from direct customer acquisition. So there's a lot of pressure. If you were talking to a founder that you were working with or you were doing a story with who really struggled to separate from the product, how would you get them to kind of back off? Like in your reporter brain, when you're building a story, how do you separate the person from their company?
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting things is like, as a reporter, as a journalist, I know that the whole reason that you're there is because you want the link and you want some kind of discussion of your product, right? Like, I know that in order for this to be a win-win, that needs to be there. But founders focus so much on that because I think they don't think that anything else is interesting. And a lot of founders, this is the downside of the 996 model, is like if you've just been grinding at a computer for years and you have not lived your life, it can be hard to tap into your story. What I found helpful with whether it's interviewing sources, whether it's helping people with their personal brand is actually to go back much earlier. So I usually try to find out who they were as either children or young adults because oftentimes founders don't even know why they're doing the thing that they're doing. But if you dig far back enough, there like is a connection between who they were in a very formative moment in their life and the work that they're doing now. I think founders, like we all do this, but we all have blindness over what makes us truly unique, what makes us special, what makes us interesting, how our story comes together. And so as a journalist, you have to do that digging, but I think it's also important for you if you are a founder and you are thinking about press or you're a PR person, you're trying to get this out of your client, you have to approach the situation differently. So something I tell a lot of my clients is like, hey, can you go back to family photo albums if you have some and like take a look at what you were doing? Because it's way better, like it's a way more believable story if you have a little like science set or a kid's first computer or something. That's something that you can build onto the about page. It's something you can talk about in content, it's something you can talk about in press, that like you've always had this latent interest in X, Y, or Z, whether it's finance, tech, beauty, whatever it is. If you can kind of show an early interest, that's a great foundation for you to build off of, because then everything is leading to this point where you finally overcome all of these struggles, you build this product, you get funded, you do all of these things. It sets you up to be that hero and to actually have something interesting to say. So 9 times out of 10, that is a fruitful area to go to, because most people have been doing the work that they've been doing far longer than they think that they have been doing that work.
That is so interesting because you're right. Like people discredit, what they cared about as children, like that it doesn't matter. But, play, like what we usually play is such during those formative years, it's so informative about what we care about, like before the world kind of gets to us, before there's like stress, before there's investors, before there's financial pressure. And so I think that people really overlook that in those, like you said, in those formative years, that really isn't play. That is like identity formation.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that like a lot of press and a lot of PR, I've noticed this especially because I've kind of gone the opposite direction that most people go. Most people start as journalists, realize there's not a lot of money to be made, and then hop over to the PR side. I went the reverse way. So I started in PR because I was like, I'm poor, I need money. Let me start in PR. And then I was able to do the altruistic work of journalism. But I realized like very, very early in that like people just don't have good clarity over what makes them interesting. They often don't spend enough time really thinking about the deep philosophy of their product. Why does this product exist? What is it about this product that is actually helpful to someone? Like they just really don't do enough of that due diligence work. And this doesn't just hurt you in PR, by the way. Like if you don't really deeply understand why your product exists, if you don't deeply understand the work that you're trying to do in the world, how that work is connected to things that a broad public cares about, it's very hard to motivate your employees. It's very hard to get people behind your product. It's very hard to keep going every day if you're not working towards that bigger thing, that bigger mission. And it makes it then very, very hard to understand how you fit into a broader media conversation, really.
Yeah, I think that's so true because I definitely think that's something that I see so much. I know that founders are working like crazy and I know that they're working like crazy in a pressure cooker, but without taking that time to kind of break that loop of thinking of like product and this and that, you really don't have the kind of insights that you need to be in the press, and then you start connecting the micro when you should be connecting the macro. So a lot of times, like from my experience, let's say I book a podcast for somebody or I book something where it's about the personal story, you know, 5 out of 10 times, or maybe more, I'm going to get asked, how does this help my company? And that question is always wild to me because if the founder blows up, if the founder story blows up, that is the ideal scenario as opposed to trying to hawk a product story. I have one client right now who her product story is fine. Like it's good as far as like product stories go, but her personal story is so good that we built the entire press machine around her personal story. And then that has greatly helped her business. So I always find that disconnect in how it really works and then getting others to understand how it really works is a gap that I'm really looking to close.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's such an important gap to close as well because founders get so I think, divorced and so stuck in their bubble, like you said, of just the day-to-day reality that even if they're reading media articles, they're maybe not reading them as conscious consumers. They're not thinking about what is the storytelling mechanic around this. Like, it's easy to forget to ask yourself the question, why am I being influenced by this? Why am I being moved by this? And I always go into it with the thought of like, if you would click off of the story, what makes you think that someone else is going to stay the entire time? You have to actually say something that grips people in. Like, there's a reason why podcast interviews never tend to start with the product. They always start with conversation, pulling people in. They start with that personal connection because people want to know, right? Like we started this conversation by talking about our personal history, the fact that we have these kinds of conversations all the time when cameras are not on
Sure.
us and when we're not shooting a podcast. It just helps people to set the stage and build that element of trust. And you really can't do that if you're just hawking a product. People hate that feeling that they're being sold to. They hate being reminded that what they're consuming is advertising. And so the more that you try to direct back to product, the more boring most of the time the pitch is going to be and the more boring the story is going to be. But you're also robbing people of the emotional connection and experience that they could have with you. And that is something that, carries a lifetime. It's something that carries over. I wrote this morning, my article on Ink that went live was about public feuding and why people love a public feud so much and why, even though it's so reputationally destructive to be in a feud, why so many people are in public feuds. We're recording today, and Elon Musk and Sam Altman, the new version of the battle is starting today as we're recording, and it's like that's one of the most legendary feuds of all time. Do either of them come out of it looking good? No, not really. They both come out of it looking pretty terrible. Alex versus Alex is the other feud
Yeah.
that's been going on this week. That was the anchor for my story, and like fine, right? But they're interesting because they're stories rooted in people. They give you this sense of hero versus villain, right versus wrong. There's a lot of meat on that bone for you to chew on and get invested in that story, even if is it the best for your mental health? No. Is it really productive for the world? No. But like people want to be invested in something, and whether it's petty drama, your product, your story, they want to be invested and they want a reason to say yes, but it's not going to happen by talking about, the little minutia ins and outs of why your product is so great. People don't care. People buy based off of feelings and emotion, and then they back that up with logic.
Yeah, that's such a good point because you also just made the point of exactly why earned media is valuable because it is absent of selling. If people would not read it as much as they do, people would not click on it as much as they do if it was an advertisement. And so I think that remembering that the value, when people say, I want to be in the media or I want to hire a PR person or I'm going to pitch a reporter, you obviously understand that there's value there, but then you can't try to strip the piece that actually makes it valuable away because you want to hawk a product or hawk a story that you want to sell that maybe not, like you said, may not appeal to, the broad reader. So this brings me to my next question. I've been really interested in your insights on. So recently for FinTech and Friends, I haven't been breaking news, but I've recently opened up FinTech and Friends to start breaking FinTech news. And so it's been really interesting for me to see some of the pitches that have been coming in. And I will tell you, and I'm sure this is not going to be shocking, 90% of them are super boring. And not even that they're necessarily bad, but they're super boring. And, fintech and all tech, you kind of have to infuse it with the humanity first, right? You can't lead with the technology. You have to infuse it with the humanity. And what I felt when I was reading the majority of these pitches was the first line was such a polished, on almost all of them, a polished elevator pitch of what the product does. They're filled with jargon. And it kind of was like a glaze over moment for me. But what I also thought was that it felt like the PR person really had the foot of their client or their employer on their neck. I don't believe that this was the most creative pitch this person could have put together. It felt like somebody who was terrified to say no to the person paying their bills. And this is a really touchy subject in comms. So my question to you, you've worked on both sides, you maintain an active client roster. What advice do you have for client management, especially when the liability is high? Like if you burn bridges with journalists and there's only like 30 of you guys left, you know, that's over. It's over. So, what are some of your pieces of advice for client management when the stakes are high, like reaching out to reporters?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I have a perfect answer for this. But what I did when I was working in PR was I always tried to connect the outcomes back to the journalist. And so one of the reasons why I was so successful in PR is that every pitch that used to be sent by my agency was customized to the journalist. It led with, "Hey, I saw that you covered XYZ. I have a client who's an amazing blah, 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 something personal to loop into that tie. And then, it's going to tie into this media conversation," basically was a winning formula that we used often. Because it was personalized to that person, it worked. And so I think it helps if you have a difficult client to actually walk them through. It is not as easy as I'm going to send out this press release. So I'm going to send out this pitch 100 times exactly the same to people and get press back. I have to basically make a case for why I should be in this person's inbox at all, right? Why it's a good use of their time to open this email. I have to make a case for why anyone is going to care about this story. And I have to make a case for why this journalist should take the time to like clean up my work, go pitch it to their editor, potentially fight for this story, and literally sometimes fight with an editor to be like, this is an important story for this reason. I understand we have this advertorial budget that we need to hit, or like this amount of clicks that we need to hit, but we need to be able to do this. If you're setting this like stock, boring, generic pitch that leads with a product and you don't have something that's like the iPhone, basically, where, when the iPhone came out, okay, fine. That could
Right.
be the pitch leader because it was so category defining, had never been seen before. Fantastic. We don't live in that age anymore. We often say that like every idea, every story has already been told. It's just about repackaging it differently. The
Sure.
same is kind of true for tech at this point. Most stories have been told. It is that personal stuff you can't get anywhere else that is actually going to make the thing. And really being able to sit down with your clients. And I think setting those expectations very clearly from the beginning. I think so many service providers allow the client to be in the driver's seat, and you have to have expectation management. I was talking to someone about this yesterday. Actually, I was like, listening to him talk about how much work he had to do. And I was like, look, this is an expectation management problem. Like you are allowing these clients to walk all over you. It is okay for you to basically say to a client, like, we have X amount of time allotted. We're going above and beyond this time, which tells me that there's something that I'm not doing in my communication. Like you make it about yourself. There's something that I'm not doing in my communication that's causing anxiety, additional emails, additional stress. So I want to have an open and honest conversation about it in order to resolve it so that you're happier, I'm happier, this relationship continues to work, and you stay with us for a long time. Being courageous conversations and like relationship management and learning to be a communicator is not just a principle for your personal relationships, it is also a principle for business ones. If you are not, there's like a saying in sales that if you don't lead the prospect will lead you. Same thing for clients. If you don't lead that client from the beginning and set the tone of how it's going to be, it's very hard to reset that expectation. You can do it, but you have to have a really open, honest, and transparent conversation that, hey, these are the results that you're wanting. In order for me to get there, you kind of have to take your boot off of, off of my neck if you want me to
Yeah.
do it. And if not, maybe we're not the best fit and we should let that contract just let itself out early because with that space, you could have a client that's actually going to listen to you and is probably willing to pay you more money, frankly, for your expertise and for your guidance than the person that's trying to, really micromanage the hell out of you and won't let you be the expert that you actually are.
Yeah, I love your answer. And I love that because I also believe that the best clients, they don't want a yes person. They want someone with a backbone. And if you're hiring somebody that you want to micromanage, then you need somebody in-house. I'm not saying that that's going to be the most amazing employment experience for somebody, but that is definitely more of an in-house situation. But, the clients that are more focused on the value and the expertise that you bring as opposed to what deliverable they think they're going to get out of it. They always are a better time. Like you said, they always pay more, they always get better results. Those partnerships last for years as opposed to maybe a fraught 6 to 9 months. And I think that it always fascinates me because obviously comms people are communication professionals. I mean, this is what we do. And yet there is such a breakdown between client and PR person. And so I agree with you. I think, in my experience, I've tried to be very, very educational, in the sense where I will walk them through. And I mean, you've known me a long time, I don't have a whole lot of patience, when it comes eventually, like,
Yeah, you do not suffer a fool. So,
no, eventually I'm like, listen, fine. So I kind of lead with, we can do it your way. And I am going to give you a crystal ball and tell you how this is going to work out. I've been doing this almost 20 years. Like, this is how this is going to work out. We could do it my way. And while I can't guarantee anything from my way, here's the track record, And I think the education piece, I also think that people get really, really emotional in these situations. And I don't think this is everyone's fault. I think when conflict or potential conflict is also tied to money, which is tied to survival, people get really worked up. They get very, very emotional.
yeah, I definitely agree. Because it is people's livelihood, right? It takes a lot of courage to turn away a bad client, to turn away a client that's going to micromanage you. Takes courage, especially if you don't have a good lead generation system in place and you don't really know when the next client is coming in. It can be a very, very difficult experience. And I always think about it this way, or I've thought about this a lot the last couple of years, is like we all roast LLMs for being very sycophantic and very yes men.
Yeah,
We all see how that is not beneficial and the sort of spiraling wormhole that we can end up in if we don't
yes,
question the basic baseline principles that we adopt, right? You could get down a very weird, very unproductive wormhole if you are not questioning the sycophancy of some of these LLM models. Same thing has to be true for if you are a client, your ability to look at yourself objectively. Do you want the equivalent of ChatGPT in your PR, your comms person? Do you just want someone who's going to say yes and follow your every whim, even though sometimes it's objectively insane? Or do you want someone
right.
who is actually going to push back sometimes? And do you want someone that's going to be leaning on expertise and like crap that you can't find on ChatGPT because the only place that it lives is in that person's head? Like, I always think it's so funny when people talk about how, oh, everything, like all, I said this earlier, but like every idea that has been created is created and is out there in the world. That is a very naive perspective. Especially in PR, most of the perspective, most of the value of a PR professional comes in the quality of their relationships, comes in the intangible knowledge about what they have tried, what they have not tried, that has come in, not come in. And that's not going to be written publicly anywhere because PR is a very competitive industry. You're competing for very limited feed space in a publication. People are not going to divulge their trade secrets. That would be insane on the internet. That'd be absolutely unhinged of them to do. So you
Right.
really do have to trust and you really do have to rely on the expertise of this person that you've hired. Otherwise, you might as well like truly take $100 bill, put it in a shoe, light it on fire, film it, and put it on the internet because that's going to get you more traction than you being really stubborn about your own trajectory and what you think PR should look like for your product.
Yeah. It's so good. That's such a great point you made because PR is so much more nuanced than what people give it credit for. The thing that I heard this great quote the other day that said people pay PR people a lot of money to get in the news. They pay them even more to keep them out of it. And I thought that was so excellent because I thought that obviously there's the the direct meaning of that, but also so much of what we do goes unseen because it is
Yeah.
very nuanced. It is, it may look like you're just having a conversation. It may look like you're just, but it's all part of what makes the PR world turn. So I've been wanting to ask you because I have a couple of things I still want to ask you because I want to leave PR people with a good idea of in this current, in this current, economy and setup. I don't want to say landscape because it sounds like I'm becoming ChatGPT.
Yeah, no, it's so
I don't say
awful.
landscape anymore,
I know, it's so awful. I constantly have to censor myself and rewrite my own articles because I'm afraid people are going to say I'm using an LLM. And it's like, no, they were all trained on my data without
Yes.
my permission. But now I have to somehow try and reinvent the English language every time I go and I open up a Word document.
Yes, I have used, so I obviously, before I was in PR, I was a copywriter. And so I used M dashes like they were going out of style. I think that's how my brain thinks. And now it's like, it was so funny because Alex was editing something for me the other day. And she was like, she's like, were you just trying to hold back not using M dashes? And I was like, yes. And she's like, we're putting them back because this is weird. But it's the same thing. But I would love to know what is standing out for you right now in your inbox? Like what kind of pitches, what's making you stop scrolling, stop sending to trash and be like, all right, cool. I'm gonna check this one out a little bit more.
Mm. Yeah, I would say like a real exclusive, so something that's really juicy. So a pitch that I did recently that went to press was at Inc. It was in connection with Bethany Frankel going on, to be the Sports Illustrated in the swimsuit edition as a
Okay.
rookie. That was the placement that they wanted, but they were willing to talk to me with specifics about numbers, brand deals, things like that. And it was perfect for my column, a perfect pitch. And so that stood out and got over the line. I'm working now with the founder of a mocktail group because she pitched me an article that was about how to get celebrity founders as a bootstrapped entrepreneur. So that angle
Oh,
of being
wow.
bootstrapped and not having the, VC ecosystem and all of the connections that come with that to actually get these celebrity equity partners, celebrity endorsements, celebrity brand faces, to me was a really interesting angle because it's something I can see a lot of bootstrap founders wanting to figure out how to do it and
Sure.
wanting to figure out how to do it well, but there's not going to be a lot of people that have access to that knowledge. That's what I'm also looking for is I'm looking for people that have genuinely interesting expertise. And so a lot of the people that are in my circle right now in terms of sources are like very weird or very specific pieces of expertise where it's like maybe they've pitched me a year or two ago and they're an actuary or something, and I have no use for an actuary at that time. But now, if I'm writing a story and it comes up and I need it, I will need it because I remember them talking about something very specific in the pitch and it just wasn't a fit at the time, but now it's a fit for me today. So, yeah, if you have any weird expertise, anything that kind of sets you apart, that's always a good one. And then anything that makes you high expert, high credible. So, being the former CMO, being former staff of a tech company is obviously a good one. And then anything that is just like a really interesting story. So I was pitched a story about someone escaping from Vietnam on a boat and then building this like $250 million AI
Wow.
security firm. So that's an interesting story because if you're willing to tell me about your childhood escape from Vietnam, and then I can connect that into whatever it is that you want, which is obviously talking about your AI security firm. Like I can make something from that. I'm not going to take the pitch exactly as you gave it to me and make that the story, but like I can ask questions and get the interesting parts out of it that weave this nice little stitch together. So yeah, I would say for me at least, those are the things that I'm finding really interesting. If you just send me a generic press release, I'm probably going to delete it. If you send me something that doesn't show me that you know the type of stuff that I usually cover, I'm going to delete it. So I see this a lot with like parenting. People send me parenting stuff all the time. I've never written
Okay.
about parenting. I've never written about the educational space. I've never written about tech and children because it's just not an experience I can relate to. I'm not an expert in it, so I'm not able to verify, confirm. It's just harder for me to get that to print than it would be for another journalist. So yeah, I'm looking for evidence that people know me, they understand the coverage, they have an interesting story, they're an expert, and they bring something unique or different to the table that's like a bit of a special sauce. And even if you think you have nothing interesting about yourself, you'd be like very surprised how much
Yeah.
about you is actually interesting to a person who doesn't know you. You just have to be willing to talk to someone, specifically your PR comms professional, about yourself and open up a little bit because they'll be able to tell right away if you've hired a good comms person, they'll know, they'll listen to you talk for 20 minutes and say nothing interesting. And then on minute 21, you say something that they can finally use and as a pitchable story. Like they'll know and they'll tell you, oh, this is the thing we need
Yeah.
to lead with because this is going to thread everything together.
That's so true. I'm very quiet when I'm listening to those, those first conversations. And then usually I'll say, that's it. And they'll be like, that? Because they're so desensitized, to their story. I'm like, no, we need to lead with that, because it's something exactly. It's like that objective, like, second opinion, because we rationalize so much in our head. Like that's not interesting, or everybody's gone through that, or, and I actually see that happen more with women than men. Like my female clients, especially, like I can ask them, because I always ask, like, both men and women, I will ask them, I will say, what accomplishments do you have? What have you done that you're proud of? And interestingly enough, the men that I work with, they will go back to childhood. They'll go back to school. They'll go back. And women, and this is not a lie, I have sat there before with a triple Ivy League educated expert who's literally one of the foremost experts in the country, maybe the world. And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think it comes back to like how like boys and girls are socialized to a large extent and what they're exposed to. Like there's a lot more. There's that meme about the Roman Empire and the fact that men are constantly thinking
Yes,
about the Roman Empire. They're constantly
yes.
appealing to history. I don't know because that's not my lived experience if that's true or not, right? But there's a lot more of this like appeal to mythology and legend and things like that. I at least was not really socialized that way. I was socialized to minimize my accomplishments or to see them as never being enough. It took a long time and it took a lot of work. And I think this is, especially for female founders, something that's worth doing is taking a look at your own story and doing a lot of that deep inner work around yourself and your accomplishments and the things you've had to overcome. Because this was even something that like I didn't think that I had a story that was worthy of telling. Because I had never worked for a big tech company. I had never done this, that, or the other thing. But it's like, oh, I actually ran a $10 million business before I was 30. I did this, I did that, I did that. I had done all of these things, but I had to get to a point where I had to have the audacity and the confidence to be able to look at those things in my own story and see them for the incredible accomplishments that they were. And I had to be in the right room. I credit a lot of me looking at my own story and me being really firm in my accomplishments now by being in a room that was very affirming to me and being in a room where people were impressed by things that I had taken for granted up until that point, and them telling me, like, no, this is really cool. Like, no, you should talk about this a lot more. And I think it's so important that as women, we spend time and just as people, we spend time being in rooms and sharing more of our story and our expertise, and also being good with your friends, your colleagues, your co-founders, just people in your life, and being like, hey, did you know that this was like really cool about you? And this is really different. And this is not an experience that most people have because it doesn't really matter if someone's a founder, if they're trying to move up the ladder. It doesn't matter what it is. You have a lot, you're way cooler than you think you are, and you have way more things that are unique about you than you think. But as people that are around those people, the more that we can point that out and like remind them of how special they actually are and how different they actually are, I think that's something I've tried to take into my everyday. And I think especially as comms professionals, journalists. I think it's super important to validate those things in clients of just how incredible they are, how unique their stories are, how much the, micro actually is really macro and is going to connect with a lot of, yeah, with a lot of people. So it's very the work of being seen and perceived by other people is very complex, and we really don't give enough credit to just how difficult it is to get past that layer of product to person. Because if
Yeah,
it's the product, people can hate the product and okay, that sucks. And it's not really, but it doesn't really affect you in the same way as if people hate you, right? And I've had plenty of people, like I wrote an article this week, and like a man messaged me on LinkedIn being like, you have no right to say that you've done XYZ, like blah, 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 blah. Just like a really stupid message.
wow.
People are going to perceive you, like people are going to perceive you, and it can be tough sometimes, but it's that one negative comment does not outweigh, or that one negative person or that one doubter should not outweigh the like thousands of people that you could help or that your story could connect to. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of just mental, emotional growth to actually be able to get to that point where you can be perceived and you can open yourself up in that way. I think what can, comms professionals do for their clients? I think giving them a lot more support in that area of how to hold space to be seen and perceived by people is so
Yeah,
important. I think comms people, when I was in PR, I spent a lot of time just focusing with my clients on the art and act of getting comfortable being seen by people a lot more than anything else, because I can pitch the best stories all day, but if you're too scared to tell it with conviction, and if you're too
yes,
scared to tell that story with openness and vulnerability and humor and transparency and levity, people are filled with multitudes. It's still not going to land the way that it should land, especially if, heaven forbid, you're in a multimedia format, you're not just on digital paper.
right.
Delivery is so important, and so much of that comes down to you being willing to be seen and perceived.
So, so true. Because I did not realize how many people struggled with visibility until I got in PR. And the one thing that I really didn't know about PR, and I don't think I would have known this I don't think you learn this in school. I don't think you learn this, is that people feel very rejected in this category. And I remember when I really first started focusing on PR solely, I was so shocked how personally people were taking rejection. So let's say we pitched something that was good, but again, you mentioned something a little bit ago about timing. Timing really matters. You can have a great story, but if it's not the right time, still doesn't get published. And I was so shocked to see how many founders were taking that as a personal rejection. And it was simply a media cycle. It meant nothing about them. It meant nothing about their worth or how they were doing. And it really affected how they wanted to proceed, and everyone had different reactions. I had some clients that would, and these were mostly men would react with anger, and women would react by shrinking. And that's pretty much, kind of how, and it was stunning to me. And so I do think that so much of this job is encouraging your client, and like you said, being supportive of your client and bringing out, relationship management goes beyond just relationship between you and the client and the reporter and the client. It really is helping to build somebody up so that they feel ready for that type of attention and that type of stage. So I think what you said is really interesting there.
Yeah, I think especially for founders too that are venture backed, there's a whole nother level to this, because we've all heard the stories of people being rejected 100 times. And so I think there's also a level of like, but I did the thing, right? Like I got funded finally, I got the product live, I like got my first 1,000 users, right? Whatever the milestone is. And now it's just this like next layer of rejection brings up all of this difficult trauma, brings up all of this uncertainty. Like
Right.
if this is why, like, I try and encourage as many of my clients as possible to like go get therapy, because I'm not a therapist, right? I'm a personal brand strategist. That is what I do. I help journalists with their writing business. I help creators grow their personal brands. Like That's what I do. So I can support you to a point, but like the deep-seated roots of rejection, right? You having been rejected 100 times. I'm not the most qualified professional to help you with it.
Right.
I honestly think that the best thing that you can do if you're a founder facing a lot of rejection, if you're in the media cycle and feeling some kind of way about it, like just book 60 minutes with a professional and talk to them about it because you'd be very surprised what you learn about yourself and why that's happening in that 60 minutes.
And you know what's wild? The therapist doesn't, you don't have to. So I think a lot of people, like, they drag their feet on therapy because they think that, we're all looking for like Hannibal Lecter level of brilliance. Okay. I mean, but the truth is the therapist doesn't actually have to be that good to be effective. And here's why I think that. Because as long as you can sometimes talk things through and just talk at someone for 60 minutes, not your friends, someone you pay for, you kind of come up with the answer yourself, you know?
Yeah, I basically pay my therapist to sit there and listen to me yap for 50 to 52 minutes and solve my own problem myself and just affirm me twice during the appointment. I
Yeah.
just need because I'm never going to put the focus, time, and attention on the calendar for me to spend time thinking intensely about a problem or a situation or something from my past. If I'm not paying it through therapy, my time is otherwise too valuable for me to sit there and spend that kind of time thinking and working through something. So even if she only contributes two things and it's just affirming me or asking me like one follow-up question, one well-timed follow-up question about something, it is worth its weight in gold because I paid for her to basically sit there and let me figure out my own problem and occasionally weigh in on something. There's lots of therapists that also take a more, questions-based approach, and they're a lot more in control. But again, I'm not a therapist, so I don't know, but I can only assume that therapists adapt based on client. And so, yeah, for me, it's the best, it's the best 60 minutes that I spend every week is that hour in therapy. It always sets the tone for the rest of the week. But yeah, I definitely recommend if you are feeling sore about it. When I started as a journalist and I was getting a lot of pitch rejection after being in a period of time where that was not my day-to-day reality, it was really helpful to just be able to realize that no, this is not about me personally. This is simply about the news cycle or about the idea. Something that's helped me a lot as well is just knowing that I am in control of my own outcomes a lot more than I think I am. So, if I'm in control, right? Like if I create a post and that post doesn't do well, and I blame it on the algorithm, I'm blaming a black box over which I have no control. If I am the reason why something is potentially not working, right? Or if I'm the reason something needs to be tweaked or changed, I have a lot of control over that situation. And so with PR, yes, a lot is out of control in the media cycle, but if you can be open and allow yourself to go there and to try new things, test new things, experiment, and see it with a scientific method lens on, then it can actually be really fun and it can be a data-driven way of you getting from a place of intense rejection to you getting to a place of almost everything that's being sent on your behalf is coming back with a favorable response because you are willing to just allow yourself to be a bit uncomfortable for 30, 60, 90 days while you live in this experiment of trying different angles to see what sticks and then doubling down on the things that people are resonating with.
That's such a good point. And I want to underscore something that you said there because I think it's going to help with perspective on both the founder side and the PR side is that reporters also face rejection because you have to sell your story to an editor. I think that sometimes people feel like you have all of the control here, that you are the one who makes the final call. I get this a lot when people get upset, for example, if like an editor decides that they're not going to backlink sources, things like that, and people will get very upset and be like, well, tell the reporter. And I'm like, reporter had nothing to do with that.
My favorite is always the headline of the story. Like I have to tell people straight up, I'm going to submit a headline. It's not going to be clickbaity. I just want you to know that once I submit it, I have nothing to do with what that headline looks like. And you need to
Right.
know that. And I will not be able to change it. So you got to know that up front and from the start because yeah, that's for me the one that I find people glomp on the most too is like, can you change this headline? Or like, this is the most clickbaity way of doing it. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the whole point is this is like Game of Thrones for clicks,
Yes.
basically. And so I'm gonna submit something. It's gonna be true. It's gonna be true to story. But like if you say something and my editor picks up on that one little thing and turns it into the headline. I don't have anything to do with that. I have no control or say over that. Sometimes I can't even get a correction request through because the editor will decide that it's factually accurate, even though what you meant and what you said originally to me was different.
Mhm.
It's factually accurate, and there's nothing that I can do to change it at that point. So yeah, journalists have I think way less control than people assume that we do. And yeah, we are far more bound by ethics than I think people would assume that we are. Like, I cannot send, it is sometimes even in my contract that I cannot send an article to be pre-screened prior to turning it into my editor. I have to take things at face value. And then I obviously, as a journalist, can use my journalistic integrity as a person to understand that, okay, I'm not going to include this line in because it detracts from the story and it's not going to be a net positive. But there
Sure.
are other people that are going to land in different ways and are going to take the most clickbaity thing that you say
Yeah.
and turn that into the spirit of the article, right? It's also about knowing that like journalists are people at the end of the day, they're coming from a different place. I'm never looking to do gotcha journalism. I'm never looking to like end someone's career and end someone's company. That's never where I'm coming from, but this is where those relationship pieces are so important too, because there are a lot of journalists that will do that and a really seasoned PR professional knows who to veer away from, stay
Yeah.
away from because they have been burned before.
Yeah. It's funny. So, two things that I would say that I have to hold people back the most on is one, the headline. I have to always educate that if they do not like the headline, that is completely out of our control. And then that feeds into another educational piece, I'll call it, which is the journalist is not your marketing like your marketing hire. The reporters are not your marketing team. And I have found that this has increased since, PR hasn't gone anywhere, but because of the LLMs, everybody now is rediscovering earned media. And there's this sense of urgency. And with the sense of urgency is, we're kind of forgetting the whole thing about the free press, that the press holds up democracy, like the real reasons that,
Supposedly, yeah.
yeah, supposedly, exactly. That's a
When
whole
it's working
other,
well.
yes, that's a whole other episode. But yes, so, there's journalism is very, very important for very big reasons that hold up the pillars of society that have nothing to do with do you like the way that the headline reads or not. And so I think that since the LLM craze has really taken off. And so that's been a piece that I think that like me and my colleagues have definitely had to keep reiterating because people are excited. But when people get excited, especially when high performing people get excited, sometimes they get a little controlling, you know?
Yeah. Well, you can see it too. Like, as a journalist, it's also not fun to ask a question and then someone completely doesn't answer the question that you've asked them. Because at the end of the day, yes, I'm not your marketing professional. I work for the publication, but I work in service of the best story. And 99.99999% of the time, what you want and I want are the same. I want the most people possible to read my stories because the more people that read my stories, the better the distribution for me, the more likely an editor is to say yes to working with me again. If I am like paid by page views, the more people that read, right, the more they engage. And you want to be seen by the most people possible. So it is really to your advantage if you are a source for a journalist to give them the answer to the question that they are asking. Or if you're not sure why they're asking the question, to clarify, hey, can you give me a heads up on why you're asking me the question so I can try and give you what you're looking for? Because
Yes.
we'll tell you, and most of the time it's not whatever like crazy gotcha story that you've just made up in your head on the spot. It is, we're trying to get like two lines of context to anchor you in a media discussion, or we're trying to fill in something that's going to make you more interesting, right? That's going to make the story more juicy, or maybe connect it to moms, or connect it to people that are working on Wall Street, or like some segment that we know exists at the publication and is a core part of their readership, that we're trying to get more of those people to care, because that's our job. It's not your job to know that. It's our job to know who is
Right.
reading our stories, who's engaging and stuff. And it's very hard if you are not willing to play ball and work with us. We don't work for sources. We don't work for PR people. We work for the story. But 99% of the time, if you just play ball, the story will end up being a story that you're very happy with, and oftentimes will exceed what your expectations of what the story could be, because that's really our job, is to take what you said, which was not that interesting, find, the 10 sentences that you said that were really interesting, and string them together in a way that people are going to care about.
I think that's so important. And it really is a symbiotic relationship, and it's about trust and flexibility. And I do find, I've definitely had I've definitely had experiences in my career where I have unfortunately ran into the few reporters that, had the gotcha moments or were not really upfront about what the interview was going to entail. But that is so far and few in between. That is not the norm. And so I think that just relaxing and asking the right questions. I think what you said, people do need to ask more, is I'd love to know more insight on why you're asking that question so I can give you the best possible answer. And I just think that because this has been a symbiotic relationship forever, but I think that everybody has to serve the story and not yourself. And if you serve the story and not yourself, everybody really gets the best outcome.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, especially now with the, rise of LLMs, like you were talking about, everyone's rediscovering PR, but in many ways, the side effect of that is that everyone's rediscovering journalism at the same time, because everyone's curious about how they can get press, right? Everyone's reading a lot more. We're all tired of looking at the same like three LLM responses to
Yeah,
everything that link us back to the same three stories. So people are interested in consuming media. This is why we've seen the growth and explosion of like Substack, for example, and platforms like Beehive. People are interested in media. They're interested even in super niche topics. It's just about understanding that you have to meet in that middle space where it's going to be a win for you and a win for the publication. And if you want, like, the more upfront that you are with the journalist, the better that it is for them too, because then they can structure it to be a win-win. Like if you are trying to improve your AEO visibility, I encourage you to like don't lead with it at the top of the pitch, but as you're going back and forth and scheduling times and things like that, be like, hey, I know we obviously can't guarantee everything and you're going to write the story that you're looking to write, but like if there's anything that you could do, we're trying to get ranked and search for this. So if there's anything that you could do, right, whether it's including a quote where we mention this, or like trying to include this keyword, like we know that you're paying really expensive money to a PR professional and a comms professional because you're trying to get specific business focused outcomes.
sure.
Like we're not idiots. So if you actually tell us upfront what it is that you want, most journalists will try to help you at least a little bit to make your goals happen. Because we'd much rather, right? Like when you get your seed funding round and you're talking to us and your company isn't big, we'd much rather that you want to talk to us when like your Series B funding goes through or you're prepping for an IPO. Like we'd much rather you have a good experience with us and come back to us as
Yes,
well. Like we're not looking to burn people that are genuinely qualified as sources. Like even when you think about, I always think about like Kara Swisher, that we truly must be the best at nurturing relationships with some of these tech people, because the way that she talks about them and engages with them, like I would not want to be anywhere near someone who sometimes said the thing that she says about some of these tech people, but she's obviously very good at that, nurturing people, and
sure.
they're obviously happy with it. All journalists have to do that. Our most important relationship is with our sources and with the PR people who control access to those sources. So it's not to our best advantage to actively work on a story most of the time that is not going to make you look good and that is not going to make you happy at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
It's so true. And then I think on the flip side, what you said is that while, founders and comms people, while everybody really cares about press and getting press again, we have to care about the media part of the earned media, right? Like we have to care about nurturing and supporting journalists and, having those relationships that are not always a one-sided ask. That's not always, what can you do for me? And I do believe that a lot of that comes from pressure from clients and employers and whatnot. And so that's why it's very, very important to, kind of sweep your front porch there so that you can protect what's really important over here and that everybody can have a really good experience.
Yeah, exactly. This whole industry is really built on trust. At the end of the day, trust on all sides of the relationship. And so the more that you can show yourself to be a credible, trustworthy person, I mean, journalists have to operate under some of the strictest and toughest ethical standards of really any profession,
Yeah.
as a part of what we do. So like in general, most of us are good people. Most of us understand the importance of value, integrity, trust, that we live by the force of our reputations. And so for us, yeah, being able to make it an actual two-way street and not a one-way street is really important. But that comes right from having really great PR people that do show us like, hey, I am going to put a good source in front of you every time. This person is going to be properly media trained. They are going to stay on message, of course, but they are going to give you what you need to create a really interesting story. And so whether it's hygiene with your clients, whether it's just even taking the time to like do a check-in with the journalist that you work with often, just showing, right? If a journalist gets laid off and you have connections to an editor, you have connections to another publication, take time to sow those seeds and nurture those relationships. If you see an opportunity, a call out for a journalist on something that you know that they cover, right? Send it to them. It takes so little, it's truly
Mhm.
so little to show a journalist that like you care and you're genuinely invested in the relationship beyond what can you do for me. We can't accept gifts, we can't do things like that, but simple things like that, people notice, they appreciate, and it's that difference between are you call number one or call number two if I have an urgent story and
Yeah,
I need to know that I'm going to get this back on time. Are you call number one or call number two on the list? You always want to be call number one on the list, ideally.
absolutely.
And a lot of that comes down to these person to person factors and not so much was it the best or most click-worthy story? It's like, no, do I know that this person is going to come through for me? And I have high faith and high trust that if they tell me, yes, I'm going to have someone for you in 2 hours, that they're going to come back within 2 hours and have that person, and it's going to be a value add to the article.
Absolutely. And I also like that's such a good point. It's like value. What value can you offer to reporters? Like that's not so I highly recommend to other PR people, like I have my clients open up their contact list. I had one client who was very, very pedigreed in like high finance and I had him open up his contacts to reporters. And at first, the question was, okay, but they're not covering me. No, not yet. And then a huge story in finance broke, and he had 5 interviews in one day. And so it is that value add, not always thinking. I always say if you don't think about yourself so much in PR, you'll never be at a lack for press, you know?
Yeah, it really is, right? Like it is a relationship that like it goes both ways. And if you can open up, right? If you can think, sometimes someone will send me something. Like if I've worked with a PR person a lot and it's not a fit, I'll be like, hey, this is not a fit, but I'm gonna forward this to this person who I
Sure.
know covers this. There might be something there for them. And then that warm introduction from me, right? Because I have a relationship with someone else, allows it to be advanced somewhere else. So yeah, it really is important how you treat your journalists, how you think about what that relationship looks like is so, so important because unfortunately, through the sheer force of people leaving and being really frustrated by the landscape of media, layoffs, a lot of people are leaving, a lot of people are gone. You'd be very, very surprised at how tiny the world of journalism actually is, how much, like, even if we never speak to each other in a way that is publicly visible for you to see that we're talking to each other, the network of journalists who are talking to each other, who are vetting and confirming, hey, is this source legit? You spoke to this person. I'm getting like a weird vibe from them. Did anything come up in your quality checks, right, in your fact checking process about this person? You'd be very surprised the number of things that never make it out to press because someone has confirmed and validated that a source is not 100% reliable. So your
Yeah,
reputation travels quickly, and that includes if you're a difficult interview, if you're a difficult person, you reschedule a lot, things like that. These
sure.
these things catch up to you very, very quickly.
Yeah. And nobody sees that, but it happens, and then it just looks like a ghosted email, but it's really so much deeper than that.
Yeah, and people move. People hop a lot in journalism, a lot more than I would say in Silicon Valley, where people stay for a while. People hop a lot more. And if you mess with a journalist at one place, you can guarantee that you are blacklisted at that new publication where they are because people move a lot and people talk a lot. So it's very, very easy if you do burn your reputation with
Yeah.
journalists, it's very easy for that to become a problem as you continue to try to scale.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ashley, this has been I think this is my favorite conversation of the year. So thank you so, so much. I also want to give people an opportunity to connect with you. If they're interested in working with you, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I do a lot of individual for PR agencies, especially in PR professionals, a lot of individual training on like the media landscape, what's working, behind the scenes stuff. So if you want to get in contact with me about that, pitch reviews, really anything at all, just to connect, pitch some of your people as sources, the best way to do that is either on LinkedIn. So you can just look for me under my name, which is Ashley Couto, or if you have something that you think is going to be a fit for my column on Inc. specifically. So I cover startups, the creator economy, founder marketing, the places on the Venn diagram where those intersect. You can pitch me at acuto@inc.com.
Amazing. And I will make sure to list your emails and also link your LinkedIn. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for just being my friend for like 11 years.
Yeah, I know, I know. You're like one of the people that I've known in the PR space slash in the business space the longest, I think. So yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about what's working in media with the audience.
I appreciate it so much. Okay, everyone, go connect with Ashley. And if you have not subscribed to FinTech and Friends, what are you even doing? You'll see a little subscribe button down there. Make sure to do it. We love to put out informative interviews that help founders, that help comms professionals, and everybody in between in FinTech just do the best they can in this wild, wild industry. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.